now. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the latest educational webinar for GTA partners. Today, the webinar is going to be jointly presented by Hugh Thomas from Three Pillars Seafood. I'm sure many of you know Hugh from his time at Morrison's, and Lucas Simons from New Foresight. And they're going to cover their new concept, the Ocean Governance Scorecard. The scorecard aims to bring the best of existing fisheries scorecards, the IUU assessments and ocean-related governance tools together, identify where there are ocean governance gaps, fill those gaps, and create an overarching platform that enables governments, seafood buyers like yourselves, certification schemes, and interested stakeholders together to realise meaningful change. I'm sure many of you have seen Seaspiracy. It's highlighted several of the known threats to the oceans, but unfortunately with several wrong conclusions. And this webinar is a great opportunity to learn about the Ocean Governance Scorecard and understand what's being referred to as the third phase of market transformation. The webinar will be recorded and made available on the GTA website. So before we start, if I could ask you to please keep your microphones on mute during the webinar to avoid any feedback issues or background noise. Both Hugh and Lucas are very keen to answer any questions, so there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. And for those of you who have just joined during the introduction, I'm delighted to introduce Hugh and Lucas.
Thank you so much, Tom. Let me introduce myself and say thank you very quickly and then give the words to you. My name is Lucas Simons. I was very kindly introduced, CEO, founder of New Foresight. We are experts in sustainable market transformation. We are dealing with the large sustainability issues, and every time that we're confronted with them is we don't think in terms of what's the next project that we can do, but we approach these matters from a lens like, okay, what is the behavior in the market, in the system that keeps on, let's say, producing this problem? And so we are always very interested in what is more the root causes of the issue and how do you solve them. Perhaps some of you already saw and heard the presentation that we gave in several conferences. There are books being written about it as well, different phases of market transformation. And if we look at the seafood sector, let me be very clear. I'm not the expert or a expert actually in seafood, but we are an expert in market transformation. And when we look at this sector, we see that there's not a shortage of FIPs going around. So there's plenty of projects and more I'm sure will be coming. There's also not a shortage of standards and labels out there. And so it's safe to say that the industry does what it can. And I'm sure there's more to be done, and not every part of the industry is doing its fair share, but on average, we are doing whatever we can. The missing actor here, the key actor here that is not taking its role, according to us, are governments. And so without governments on board, who take care of the public space that is our oceans and our seas, then market transformation is pretty much hopeless in the phase that we're now. This is indeed the third phase of market transformation, as you called it, Tom. And so we need to get governments on board, but there are also plenty of reasons why they are not doing it. For employment, economic growth, cheap source of protein, interest, lack of abilities, lack of will. So there are plenty of reasons why it's just easier to continue doing what we're doing now. And so what you and New Foresight have been thinking about is what could be an instrument to really incentivize governments to do the right thing, so that if they are doing it, that they are being recognized and rewarded for it by market pool and by investments and by reputation and by credibility. And if they're not doing it, then that also becomes transparent. So this is the idea where the Ocean Governance Scorecard came from, and we are very much looking forward to hear your questions, your feedback. I'm personally very interested in questions. Why should we not do this? So that's already what I would like to hear from it. What stops us really? So perhaps that is something we can address. But I'm here with my colleague Laura, who is the project leader of this. But actually, what I want to do now is give the word to you, Thomas. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you to the Global Tuna Alliance for allowing us the opportunity to talk about the Ocean Government Scorecard for you today. What I will do is I'll turn off my camera and start to share my screen and move into the presentation. Just excuse me.
Don't see it yet?
Okay, it's coming. It's coming.
Ah, there you go.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah, we see it.
Right. Okay, so hopefully you can see the
it's a presentation mode.
Very much. The world's seas and oceans are a public resource, as you all know, and within the 200 nautical mile zone are managed on behalf of the nation's public by governments. Outside the 200 nautical miles national jurisdiction, the world's oceans are an international resource which everyone nominally owns, but few really do. And unlike many commodities, fish and seafood has UN mandated and agreed codes of conduct for fisheries and aquaculture, which includes law of the sea and other international policies. Left to their own devices, some countries have done a great job managing their own seas and engaging in management of international waters aligning to the international standards, whilst others have at best given them scant regard or been unable to garner the resources to actively manage and exploit them for the benefit of both today's generation or the future. During the past 20 years, there's been an increasing realisation that without active management of fish stocks, extractive activities and discharges into the seas around us, that the world's oceans are becoming overfished, overexploited, polluted, increasingly unproductive, threatened in numerous ways, and in many ways unlawful. As realisation dawned, the buyers of seafood, many under pressure from non-governmental organisations, have grappled with the recognition that their customers want to buy seafood from fish stocks that are well managed and sustainable. Some industry first movers worked collaboratively and formed fisheries sustainability standards, such as the Marine Stewardship Council, and countries with better fishery management even developed their own fishery standards or to demonstrate to the seafood buyers that they could eat seafood with a clear conscience. Following the first movers around 10 years ago came a larger cohort of seafood buyers who wanted to ensure their seafood supply chains originated from sustainable stocks. Increasingly, they came to understand that many commercially exploited fish stocks were not managed with sufficient scientific rigour or management to achieve these certification schemes, and many fishery improvement projects were developed to transition fisheries to certification. At the same time, more certification standards were developed, bringing with it the need for certification schemes to be benchmarked against the United Nations Codes of Conduct, and the introduction of conditions within fisheries certification, which said that in a defined period in the future, governments would implement rules and regulations so that the fish stocks could be sustainably managed in the future. With supply chains mapped, seafood certification proliferating, and despite fishery improvements happening for individual supply chains, seafood buyers were still being criticised for continuing to buy from unsustainable fisheries. The reason? Fish stocks are exploited by more than the vessels the individual buyers take fish from. Fish stocks often straddle numerous government jurisdictions. Fishing boats are mobile and different nations exploit the same stock. When over-the-horizon seafood buyers nor government could see what vessels were doing, and even if they could, who had the resources to adequately monitor and control their activity? With the added complication that some stocks were moving jurisdiction with climate change, whilst others in international waters are managed from regional fisheries management organisations without the ability to influence change as they're operating at the lowest common denominator. Recognising that individually many buyers could not solve these issues alone, seafood buyers, such as yourselves, began to coalesce into pre-competitive collaborations with the aim of bringing a coherent and common advocacy voice today. Today, we're at the stage where collaborations of industry collectively advocate for better regulation to government to better manage fish stocks, or have an expectation that government can and will implement the existing regulations they have that are in place, but often choose not to apply. To make matters worse, many of the fish stocks that have previously been third-party certified have already lost their certification or are in danger of doing so, not because there's insufficient stock and it is being overexploited, but because traditional fishing nations who are maybe no longer catching the stock as it's moved out of their waters have no agreement with those who are now catching the stock, and so there's no agreement on how the stock will be managed. The final challenge for seafood buyers is that as they've understood their wild-caught seafood supply chains, they've also realised that people on board fishing vessels operating over the horizon may well be enslaved or working in unsafe conditions, as the international maritime regulations that apply to the merchant sector have specific exclusions for fishing vessels. Compounding the issue was third-party certification for fish stocks were written with an environmental lens, totally overlooking the labour and social aspects of the seafood trade. So this is nothing new. You know this. So where are we today? Well, today we have large numbers of seafood buyers who want sustainable seafood and are unable to purchase it. We have certified fisheries that are in danger of losing their status. We have fishery improvement projects that are either stalling or in danger of stalling. We have seafood buyers undertaking fishery and source risk assessments, which are increasingly coming out with government regulations and legislation that are missing or poorly implemented. And as more seafood buyers search for risk assessment information, they're lacking information with which to make their decisions or to make a consistent decision from. Government information is presented from the lens of a coastal state alone, without recognising that seafood buyers and their supply chains are also influenced by port, flag and market states, and developing world fisheries have little or no way to access international markets, as the route via certification is not available to them. So why is this? Simply because government legislation is either totally absent, woefully implemented, and existing information available to seafood buyers is scattered in numerous places, out of date, or provided by an individual or an organisation with an agenda or lens that is biased. So what is the solution? We believe there needs to be a one-stop ocean governance database and scorecard, which takes the agreed indicators of good fishery management, adds to it the agreed indicators of good labour practice, and which generates an assessment of what coastal, flag, port and market state regulations each country has, and how well these regulations are implemented. Once a robust mechanism and scorecard for fishery-related governance issues is established, other ocean-related topics, such as plastic pollution, eutrophication, etc., can be bolted on. To explain the concept that we're talking about, we are focusing on one specific key area today, which we recognise others, such as the Global Fishing Index, is already looking at. But by talking about this specific part of an ocean governance scorecard, we hope to be able to provide context to the wider concept. Any robust system needs to have the elements of policy, an understanding of the resource or areas that is being focused on managing and implementing, with the additional areas of monitoring and compliance, such as found in the fisheries context. Existing tools have some of these elements, but as explained earlier, many have parts that are missing that are important to seafood buyers such as yourselves. Missing elements can and do include labour responsibilities for flag and labour providing states, market states which choose to ignore CITES and IUU responsibilities, and port states who either fail to take their responsibilities at all or fail to implement them when they've indicated that they will. If we apply this to the narrow lens of fishery management systems, what this shows is that in all of them there are areas where they are failing. Seafood buyers have realised these failings, and a tangible outcome of this recognition is groups such as the Global Tuna Alliance and others, whose organisations that focus on government advocacy to bring about change in support of the other mechanisms that exist. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of groups such as these, there continues to be a challenge. And challenges range from port states continuing to allow the landing of fish without any checks being needed, to market states warranting the continued importation of fish that undermines the work being done by the few. Our view is that in the majority of cases, there is a disconnect between what governments and the seafood industry at large is doing. It can be argued that seafood buyers such as yourselves have already bridged the gap between policy and the market, but this unfortunately is limited and tends to focus on the higher value species. Our assessment is the current situation is a low scoring system which could do better. And as this slide shows, there is relatively limited overlap between the governments and markets, and things could improve. So what is the solution? There needs to be a one-stop ocean governance database and scorecard, which takes the agreed indicators of good fishery management, adds to it the agreed indicators of good labour practice, and which generates an assessment of what coastal, flag, port, and market state regulations each country has, and how well these regulations are implemented. Once a robust mechanism and scorecard for fishery-related governance issues is established, other ocean-related topics such as plastic pollution, eutrophication, seabed mining, etc., can be bolted on. The ambition is that this framework enables a coherent sector-wide transformation strategy, will drive continuous improvement, will reveal the good, the bad, and the ugly within the systems, whilst informing the buy-side market actors and investors what is really happening. We believe that a fully functioning ocean governance scorecard will lead to equality instead of the few bearing the burden. Government will provide the governments the opportunity to access international funding, will enhance transparency of the challenges which both governments, sourcing countries, governance, and the governance of the states within the supply chain have, will support existing fishery improvement projects, many of which are recognised fail to achieve their ambition of third-party certification, often within several, if not many years of being launched, and maintain ongoing third-party certification, which we recognise is important to many seafood buyers. Applying the logic already described, we believe that the current situation translates the fishery management archetypes into these sectors. Buyers such as yourselves are found to be working with perhaps 35% of the world's systems, which leaves the remaining fisheries in a continued race to the bottom. The problem faced by many engaged businesses, especially considering COVID-19, is why should you be called out for misdemeanors that are happening in fisheries that you might be associated with, but where your supply chains have been mapped, understood, risk assessed, improvement and risk mitigation steps being put into place, and like you are doing everything that you can, but you still get criticised by the likes of Seaspiracy. And we're talking just about fish stocks and some elements of labour without talking about plastic pollution, eutrophication, water quality, seabed mining. All these things that governments within who have the responsibility to govern our oceans are failing to do. When we apply the logic through a seafood oceans governance scorecard, it becomes clear that the alignment between seafood buyers and governments is lacking in all but the systems that are high scoring. We believe that the majority of the systems risk markets pulling out of them. There lies an unfulfilled opportunity for employment, nutrition, and sustainable fisheries, and that there is an opportunity to provide a route to high-scoring systems. When taking a step back and considering all that is happening, seafood buyers, NGOs, governments, financial investors, and other interested stakeholders need something different and something that is beyond what is currently happening. I'm sure you're already thinking, so why do we need yet another benchmark or scorecard? Are these people just making the same mistake as happened with seafood certification and creating something else that will either add to the noise or add to confusion? The simple answer is no. We are proposing something that is different. We've drawn up a short list of existing benchmarks within the seafood landscape. You'll see that there is some crossover, but for me, the most striking thing about this list is that the assessments and benchmarks are either out of date, are extremely useful, but only cover a very small number of states, and are sat on different websites with differing inputs into what is credible, and do not cover the current, the new, and potentially the areas that are over the horizon or yet to be viewed that seafood buyers see are necessary. In the earlier conversations, what we are proposing was likened by one of our stakeholders as the ring to bind them all. And in essence, that is perhaps what we are proposing, where everything is brought together. And so all of the different work that's been done with the existing benchmarks and assessment schemes are pulled together with a group that will agree a common process to do this. An ocean governance scorecard will score the quality of government resources, government policy, and importantly, the implementation. This will lead to significant overlap between government and market initiatives and lead to the delivery of effective outcomes. It is hoped that the scorecard will not disadvantage small island and resource poor states, will provide access to international funds that could be leveraged to remedy poor scores. It will allow seafood buyers the opportunity to understand where governments associated with their total seafood supply chains are lacking regulations or lacking the implementation and support so that they can improve what they're doing. We believe it will reduce the duplication of numerous seafood buyers having to individually understand what the government challenges are within supply chains. And we genuinely believe that this will facilitate ongoing third-party certification where it continues to be required to demonstrate compliance with buyers' needs. The scorecard that we are proposing is intended to bring benefits to all stakeholders, whether governments, market players, or NGOs. And we believe the multiplier effect, the global recognition to governments of taking part, that there will be cost sharing and improved focused efforts for buyers all across the world and not just those that are currently engaged. And we believe that it will maximise the impact and the ability for NGOs to leverage policy reform. Success will include the 5 factors listed here, as without these we will see duplication, confusion, disagreement, and yet more delays in delivering what we all require, which are sustainable, socially equitable, and productive oceans environment. What we're asking is actually a call to action. We are currently asking for people to give us input to see whether the concept we're proposing is a sound concept, whether we can get people to sit together around the table from the existing scorecards and assessments to sit and work together so that industry, the seafood buyers, can have a coherent place to work. And then if we can develop a core group, then we will go through the concept building. We plan to build a scorecard within 2022 and then look for implementation, initially focusing on the fisheries elements, using some of the existing scorecards, identifying then the other areas that need to be taken and building from there. As Lucas said, as Lucas, myself, and Laura Hilbron, who's already also on the call, who's working on this as it stands at the moment. And there's just a short slide on the partners that New Foresight currently works with. I'll stop the presentation there, and we aim to give plenty of time for questions, and hopefully we can generate a conversation with plenty of questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh and Lucas. That's great stuff. Lucas, did you want to just add anything at the end to just give you an opportunity before we go into Q&A?
Very shortly, Hugh was very complete. One is this idea is we need to come together as a sector, but we're not naive. We also are aware that people will think, what's in it for us, or why not me, or so we need to be smart about it and find ways to make it work for everybody. That also means that we don't want to start from scratch. I think you already showed that there's great work being done, but it's fragmented, it's a bit all over the place. So it's building on that great work to put it together and actually recognize that great work. So that's very important, which I would like to emphasize. And what I would like to emphasize again, what you already said, is that it's not so much the content that perhaps is the struggle, because there are very smart people already working in this industry. So we should be able to make this scorecard relatively quickly from a content point of view. What is absolutely critical for success is, can we make it accepted so that stakeholders actually rally behind it? So what would that take? I'm anxious to hear feedback there. 2 is markets start to use it as well. So if certain systems score lower, then will markets just continue to buy, or will they actually start taking it into account in their sourcing policies? Because that is when we are actually creating the leverage. The same is true for investments. Can this scorecard be used for investments? But at the same time, what you already said as well is credible improvement programs. So now, what does it take to bring a system from a 1 to a 2 or 3 star, if you will? And if a credible improvement plan is there, then we should also help these nations and governments and systems to improve. And so, and now also all the FIPS and all the standards suddenly fall into place. So in my mind, in our experience, and we have been working in so many sectors all over the world, and this is now happening in other sectors as well. We really think that the seafood sector in general would hugely benefit if we would be able to create such a mechanism. Really interested to hear the feedback from everybody and the questions.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. I've actually got a couple of questions come through on the chat, which is super. But of course, anyone, if you have any questions, please just jump in or use the hand raise function. I think you know what to do by now. First question is, who else are you working with on this?
We've for the first time presented this idea. I think it was last year, September, during one of the conferences. Tom, you were there as well. You as well was one of those panels we did together. We got quite a large amount of positive feedback during that conference, but also in the weeks following. You and I got together to work this out. We have been talking to quite I think 20-25 organizations, all from retail to the NGOs, to other organizations who do something similar or are working on those elements which you presented. And so we have been doing our first round of talks. Based on this, we've created this presentation that you just presented, and we are currently sending this around again for a second round of interviews, and very happy to use also platforms like this to present it. So we are in the early stages of creating a smaller group of founders or co-initiators, if you will. And actually quite a number of calls are being lined up as we speak. And so we're still, I would say, first about the feedback, well, I'll leave that to you, because he has done a lot of those conversations. How would you describe the feedback, you, at the moment?
It's fair to say that people understand the concept. There's certainly a lot of interest. The overlap, I think we need to just make sure that people are clear that we're not trying to duplicate or stop anything that's already happening. It's really about trying to understand what the gaps are and trying to make it a lot more accessible to people all over the world. So there's certainly been plenty of interest, but we recognise that we need to find a core group then that we will sit down with, work over plenty of coffee and probably some beer in the evening, and come up with something that's very tangible. So yes, we're not formally working with any partners as it stands at the minute, but there are lots of ongoing conversations which we take heart with.
Thank you. Lucy.
Hi there, everybody. Lucy from New England Seafood. Thank you very much for the presentation. An observation, really. It's really interesting to me that this is kind of a starting point that many of us, no disrespect, in industry have missed. It's kind of, I think it's a really interesting concept and could be extremely important. And with hindsight, it's possibly where some of us could have started several years ago, before trying to work on the improvements that we've all been making efforts towards. But no matter that we've missed doing that in the first place, I think now the opportunity is there to really help provide absolute clarity on what the situation is globally. And that in turn provides a much better platform from which to go and explain the issues, look at what improvements are potentially needed, and critically to go after the investment that's needed to achieve those. And I think having this very widespread platform showing all the different interested parties, as it were, in the oceans will be incredibly helpful. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I really appreciate that you say that, and very encouraging. So we would certainly want to invite you to help us, join us, and help rally others around this if you want. Thank you.
And just to take from Lucy's point, I was as guilty as anybody, Lucy, at having spent the time doing the work we've done. I think part of it is about understanding the science and understanding the opportunities that are available to us. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that if you look at some of the successes internationally, where the fishing fleets or the governance has been done best, it's where the governments have actually stepped up and made those structural changes and then recouped some of either the investment later, or they've just said it's part and parcel of what they need to do for the oceans to be well managed. So yes, like Lucas, I welcome your comments and totally agree that the structural funds need to be helped to make this change.
Thank you. Andy.
Oh, thanks, Tom. So from my perspective, I think it's a really great idea. I think it's a really compelling pitch, and yeah, I'm quite excited to kind of hear the discussion. I think one thing I was reflecting on as you were talking, Hugh, was that as a retailer that often gets assessed and benchmarked, the most meaningful thing is where we engage with the benchmark, engage with the criteria. And I was trying to work out if the theory of change is that the countries themselves engage with the benchmark and the criteria and therefore kind of seek to improve their performance, or is it that the private sector engage with it and then focus their advocacy on some of those countries where improvements are needed, or is it a bit of both? That was the first question. And then the second one was, I was maybe linked to that, is does it need some kind of institutional home in order for governments to engage with it and take it seriously? And I just wondered if you'd thought about, is it something that sits within the FAO and the Committee on Fisheries, or actually is there strength to having it sitting outside those institutional frameworks?
Andy,
yeah, go.
Because ultimately, as I mentioned, success of an idea like this is not having the best tool available. It's not the content. There's just that the challenge, because the content will evolve, and so there are a couple of success criteria, if you will. One is a good content, a good tool built on other great work that's out there. So but that's almost the easiest part. The second one is governance. So indeed, should that be an institute, or should that be a multi-stakeholder governance around it? Is it a new initiative? I don't know, but it needs to sit somewhere where the credibility and the gravitas is ensured, if you will. A third one is a clear and credible processes of both. How do we measure things? Because before you know it, it becomes fake news and nobody takes it serious. And yeah, it's only these guys that say it. So where do we get the data from? How is it measured? And do people have an opportunity to respond to it? So that process of scoring and assessing needs to be done well. And then what does it mean to improve? And so that also needs to meet certain criteria, but this can all be worked out. This is more the boring procedural stuff, but it is very important. And then another criteria I already mentioned is that it's got teeth, right? Markets start to respond to it, investments start to respond to it, NGOs start to respond to it, and that creates the incentives for improvement. And so we celebrate and we reward the ones who are doing well and are going up, and we go after those who are lagging behind and help to incentivize them. So it starts to have a little bit of teeth and not just all talk. And then it needs to also justify that there are different types of systems, and it's also locally different. Taiwan will be different than Peru. Fish species are different, so we also need to agree on localized, bottom-up, multi-stakeholder processes. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. So there's a sort of global yardstick, but local implementation. And so there are quite a handful of success criteria. Now, the good news is we already know what they are, and there are many examples of how to do them wrong, and there are a few examples on how to do them right. And so if we put our thinking caps together and we are able to work them out, then this has a more than a fair shot of working. And it's a long-term strategy. This is not a short-term win, and 1 year it's done. This is something that needs to grow over at least 5 to 10 years, almost, unfortunately. But so in short, Andy, your questions are right to the heart of it. What will make this eventually successful?
Okay, Andy.
Yeah, no, that's great, Lucas. Thank you.
I've had a question come in the chat. How best should we, and I presume that in the supply chain, use the scorecard?
Okay, so the view as it stands at the minute is that the scorecard will be developed. It will assimilate all of the various criteria and put them into a ranking, and that there will also be some areas that are highlighted in terms of where there's areas that are lacking, next steps that can be taken to improve the transition, so that as supply chain owners or people within the supply chains look at their supply chains, they can go to the scorecard and say, okay, I'm looking at this particular element of my seafood supply chain. How does this state perform in this particular area, and what are the things that it's lacking in? And it should provide them then some guidance for an advocacy ask or group to do some work on what they need to include within their fishery improvement project. All those sorts of things. So we believe it will provide the one-stop shop to help seafood buyers understand what the issues are, and that there will be some granularity in terms of not necessarily what they have to do, but what it is that the risks are that they've got there. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Hugh. Do we have any other questions for Hugh or Lucas? No, I think not. It's quite good though. You got away with that a bit.
Can I ask a question back? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course it is. Please do.
So first of all, thank you for your very encouraging comments. What would stop us from doing this? Why would the sector not do this step? Can you help us think that through? And therefore, what should we be doing so that we overcome those barriers?
Does anyone want to go first with that one? Lucy?
I could. It's going to be vested interests. It's going to be other vested interests who, for whatever reason, don't find this to be there to be towards their advantage. I would suspect that that's an area one needs to look at. There will be others.
Yeah, that's a familiar one. Thank you.
I got a couple of ideas. so perhaps one thing that could prevent this is being too ambitious at the outset in terms of what you're trying to achieve. I was thinking about that point about do you need an institutional setting for this? And I was thinking, could you spend the next 5 years trying to persuade the FAO to buy into this, support this? Whereas I could see some logic to just almost starting bottom up and trying to, design the methodology, get it out there, get it operational, and then gain credibility and traction as you go.
Yeah.
So I did kind of that was one, and then I was just reflecting that this feels to me from the presentation that it's quite dependent on you as individuals taking it forward. And I was just going to ask the question if it's okay. What do you have enough capacity and support at this stage to take it forward from this concept stage, or are you looking for specific funding or support to enable that?
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for 2 remarks. One is, I agree completely. Ultimately, it needs a solid home with a good governance, but I don't think we should start with lobbying for the FAO. And even if they would say yes, then it's already dead on arrival. Sorry if I'm skeptic there. But yeah, so start up, bottom up, building on there, and then slowly create credibility. That's how these things work. And yes, to your second point, that means it is it's very much dependent on individuals. And so currently, you and myself and Laura, we spent it's all our free time and our knowledge and our passion, if you will, put into it, quite a few hours. And obviously, that's not what we can do or should be doing. And so yes, we're looking for a couple of things. One is, and that was also the first question, we're looking for support through partnerships, but not any partnership. I really would like to see people who believe in this and want to see it happen as well. So there's a joint vision there to make this happen. And yes, that also means that we need to have the resources to cover our time, if you will, and other people's time, but also to do research or to organize certain things, etc. This cannot be a hobby in that sense. So yes, that's what we are currently looking. And our strategy here is, while we do presentations like this, and there are already quite a few in the making, we are looking for that core group who can call themselves also founders or initiators or granddaddies of this idea, and that we indeed pull up some resources and then see if we can make it happen. Thank you, Andy, for that question, for those 2 questions.
I've had a ping in the chat saying one concern is initiative fatigue, but I know that's something you're both aware of myself. I know that.
So the moment we stop taking action is the moment we give up. So for me, I recognize very much the initiative fatigue, and this should therefore not be yet another initiative. That's why we want to emphasize we are building on all the great work that's already there. Actually, we want to tie together and emphasize and recognize all of that work. But create the synergies and the economies of scale and the network effects and the pull power and the market drive to actually give it more oomph. So I don't see it. I hope we can present it in such a way that it is not just yet another initiative, another FIP, another idea, another standard. That would be the end of this. But indeed, that it is the one that binds it together and creates the credibility. How do you see this, you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was always quite happy to sit there and say we need this like a hole in the head, all these different initiatives. And I think part of the landscape that we see is that there is going to be greater and greater transparency coming. There's going to be more and more initiatives and challenge coming to retailers and their suppliers. And at some point, people have to say, enough is enough. And I think we're getting to that point. I actually believe that COVID has brought many businesses sitting there saying, well, hold on a minute, you know, there's a fine line between altruism and doing what's right for the customer and the business. And actually there needs to be a slightly different way. Third-party certification has its place, but it was there. It came as a concept because governments weren't stepping up and being able to demonstrate to seafood buyers and their customers that they were doing what they should have been doing. So there's a step beyond there. And so, you know, we are proposing that this may well be that. And if the opportunity arises to pull 3 or 4 of the existing schemes together, and they have the opportunity and the will to sit there and drive it with us, then we're very happy to do that. It's not saying that they will disappear. It's just about pulling the resources together to enable that to happen. So yeah, you know, hopefully no fatigue, please.
How realistic is it to get some government? To get some government endorsement, or does it threaten to bias in its favor or certain parts of the world from the outset? Yeah, very good point. And so this is a very crucial question. Actually, I was approached. I didn't even tell you, Hugh. I was approached yesterday by the Dutch government based on the blog that we've written on the Seaspiracy, and that it's actually, well, it's the call for the Ocean Governance Scorecard. If you want to, perhaps you've already seen it. Otherwise, it's there on LinkedIn. So the Dutch government reached out to me to set up a call to discuss this. I don't know what that means, but we need only 1 or 2 governments like this in the beginning, 1 or 2 or 3 retailers, 1 or 2 or 3 organizations like you, 1 or 2 initiatives like GTA and some NGOs to pull it off. And then we might have a good start to slowly but surely, as we discussed, bottom up, start building this together and start adding the credibility. I don't think we need to persuade the United Nations from the very beginning, or the FAO. Who knows? Perhaps 1 or 2 ministries or governments will support this idea. Always, of course, a little bit in the back and not too much up front, but who knows? We might get some support in there.
Great, thank you. So any final thoughts or questions or comments from anyone?
I've just got one, Tom. It's Sarah at World West Foods.
Yeah, please, Sarah.
Hello. Just thinking about that initiative fatigue, have you engaged with any of these, the good initiatives? You had a slide of them, I think, already, and what's their interest been?
Yes, we have. We've spoken to several of them. One of them listened to the pitch and said, well, we should just expand what we're doing and take this on. And our view is, well, if that's what you want to do, great, then let's see some action. We spoke to another one last week who actually hosts 2 of the benchmarks that we have identified on the list, and they're very much open to having a conversation with their funders and seeing if there's an opportunity to work together. So yes, we have seen some positive feedback from some of the benchmarks and assessors that we've spoken to, but we haven't spoken to them all, and there continues to be a lot of homework for myself and Lucas and Laura to do.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, thank you firstly to Hugh and Lucas for presenting. Loads of questions there. I hope that was helpful to you both. And thank you for joining the webinar. If you do have any thoughts come to you and you'd like me to contact Hugh and Lucas, I can certainly pass over any questions. I'm sure you guys would be happy to continue the discussion. The next webinar is going to be on the 25th of May on the human side of fishery improvement, and it's going to be about Fishery Progress's new social policy. So with that, I would like to say a big thank you to Hugh and Lucas again. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Excellent. Feel free to reach out to us for questions or support. Please do so.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.